The moment my son's hands slammed into my shoulders, I felt the world tilt. 1 second I was holding the green bean casserole I'd spent all morning making. The next I was crashing backward onto the hardwood floor. The dish shattered. Green beans scattered everywhere. My hip screamed in pain. The entire family gasped, frozen around the Christmas dinner table. But what made my heart shatter wasn't the fall. It was watching my only son tower over me and spit those words, "This place belongs to my mother-in-law now. Get out." I lay there on the floor of what I thought was my own dining room, stunned into silence. The pain in my hip was sharp and hot, but it was nothing compared to the pain radiating through my chest. Around me, the Christmas dinner party dissolved into chaos. My younger sister Carol dropped her wine glass and rushed to my side, her face white with shock. My nephew Derek was right behind her, both of them kneeling beside me in the scattered green beans and broken ceramic. "Billy, oh my God, are you okay?" Carol's hands were shaking as she tried to help me sit up. But what struck me most was the silence from my son. Brandon just stood there, 6 feet tall and solid, his face hard as granite. Behind him, his wife Stephanie wore an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't shock or concern, it was satisfaction. A small, cold smile played at the corners of her mouth. Some of the other guests looked uncomfortable but frozen in place. Brandon's father-in-law, Frank, shifted in his seat, staring down at his plate. Stephanie's sister Amber exchanged a quick glance with her husband, but said nothing. It was as if everyone was afraid to move, afraid to take sides. I finally found my voice. "Brandon, what are you talking about? This is my house. I've lived here for 35 years. "Not anymore." His voice was flat, emotionless. "We bought it from you 6 months ago. You need to leave." The room spun. 6 months ago? I'd never sold my house, never even considered it. This was the house where I'd raised Brandon after his father died, where I'd worked 2 jobs to keep the mortgage paid, where every room held memories of birthdays and homework sessions and late-night talks. "I never sold you anything," I said, my voice rising as Carol and Derek helped me to my feet. My hip throbbed with every movement. "What are you talking about?" Stephanie stepped forward then, her voice sickly sweet. "Mom, we've talked about this. Remember? You signed all the papers in June." She walked over to the sideboard and pulled out a folder. "See? Right here. Everything's legal." She held up documents with signatures and official-looking stamps. My signature, or something that looked like my signature. But I'd never seen these papers before in my life. "I never signed those," I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. Brandon's expression shifted slightly, and what came next was worse than the push. "Mom, you've been getting forgetful. Confused. We talked about this with Dr. Walsh. He said it's early-stage dementia. That's why we're taking care of things for you now." The words hit me like a physical blow. Dementia? I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I was sharp, still working part-time at the library, balancing my checkbook every month, remembering every appointment and birthday. "That's not true," Carol snapped, standing up to face Brandon. "Your mother is as sharp as she's ever been. I see her 3 times a week. There's nothing wrong with her mind." "With all due respect, Aunt Carol," Stephanie cut in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You might not be the most objective observer. It's hard to see decline in people we love. But Brandon and I are with her more often. We've noticed the signs, the forgetting, the confusion. That's why we've been taking steps to protect her." The dinner party was completely destroyed now. Some guests were gathering their coats, murmuring awkward goodbyes. Others sat in stunned silence. I felt humiliated, standing there in my good Christmas dress, now stained with gravy and green bean juice, my hip aching, being told I was losing my mind in front of everyone I cared about. "This dinner is over," Brandon announced. "Everyone should go home." "Mom, you're obviously upset and confused. Why don't you go rest in the guest room?" The guest room. Not my bedroom. The guest room. I wanted to argue, to fight, to scream. But I was outnumbered and in pain, and the way everyone was looking at me made me feel small and powerless. Carol squeezed my hand. "Come on, Billy. Let's get you cleaned up." She helped me upstairs to what used to be my master bedroom. When I opened the door, I barely recognized it. Everything was different. The walls were painted a color I'd never chosen. The furniture was new. My belongings were gone. It was like I'd been erased. "They redecorated," I whispered. Carol's jaw clenched. "We're calling the police. This is insane." But I was too shaken to think clearly. Carol helped me change into clean clothes and settled me into the small guest room down the hall. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single dresser. This was where they expected me to live? In my own house? Carol wanted to stay, but Brandon appeared in the doorway and told her it was time to leave. His tone left no room for argument. Carol hugged me tight and whispered, "I'll call you first thing in the morning. We're going to fix this." After everyone left, the house fell silent. I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, my mind racing. How had this happened? When had this happened? I tried to remember anything from 6 months ago that might explain this, but there was nothing. No conversation about selling the house. No signing of papers. Nothing. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I crept downstairs to the basement. Brandon and Stephanie's bedroom was on the second floor, and I could hear nothing from up there. I needed answers. I needed to find something that would prove I wasn't crazy, that this was all wrong. The basement was where I'd stored most of my personal documents after Brandon and Stephanie moved in 3 years ago. They'd said they needed space, wanted to combine households, and I'd been happy to have them close. Stephanie had been so sweet back then, calling me Mom, bringing me flowers, helping with housework. When had it all changed? I found boxes stacked in the corner, most of them labeled in my own handwriting. I started going through them, searching for anything financial. It took an hour, but finally, I found a folder I didn't recognize. Inside were bank statements I'd never seen before, statements from my accounts, but showing transactions I'd never made. Large transfers, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, all going to a joint account belonging to Brandon and Stephanie. The dates went back almost 8 months. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page. There had to be over $300,000 transferred out of my accounts. That was everything, my entire retirement savings. The life insurance money from when my husband died 5 years ago. Everything I'd saved over 40 years of working. And the signatures on the authorization forms looked like mine, but something was off. The loops in the letters were slightly different. The slant wasn't quite right. Someone had forged my signature. Over and over again. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Every statement. Every forged signature. Every transfer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. This wasn't just about the house. They'd been systematically draining my accounts for months. I heard a creak upstairs and froze. Footsteps. Someone was awake. I quickly shoved everything back into the folder and hid it behind some old Christmas decorations in a different box. Then I crept back upstairs as quietly as I could and made it to the guest room just as I heard a door open down the hall. I lay in the dark, my heart racing, clutching my phone with all the evidence stored in my photos. Tomorrow I would go to the police. Tomorrow I would fix this. Tomorrow I would get my life back. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. By the time the skies started to lighten on the morning of December 26th, I was already dressed and packing a small bag. I had to get out of here. I had to get somewhere safe where I could think clearly and figure out my next move. I texted Carol at 6 in the morning. "Can you pick me up? End of the street. Don't come to the house." Her response came back immediately. "On my way." I moved as quietly as possible, gathering a few changes of clothes, my important documents that I could find, and my phone charger. I was almost to the front door when I heard a voice behind me. "Going somewhere, Mom?" I turned to find Stephanie standing in the hallway, wearing a silk bathrobe and an expression that made my blood run cold. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law from last night was completely gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. "I'm going to stay with Carol for a few days," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stephanie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really think we're just going to let you run off and cause trouble? After we've worked so hard to set everything up?" "Set everything up?" I gripped my bag tighter. "You mean stealing from me? Forging my signature? Trying to convince everyone I have dementia?" She stepped closer, and I instinctively backed toward the door. "You're a pathetic old woman who's in the way. Brandon does whatever I tell him to. He always has. Did you really think your precious son loved you more than he loves me? More than he loves money?" "Brandon would never go along with this," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure they were true. Brandon already has gone along with it, for months. He's the one who practiced your signature until he could forge it perfectly. He's the one who transferred the money. He's the one who filed the guardianship papers. She smiled. "Though I came up with the plan. I'm good at this, you know. You're not the first." The casual way she said it made my stomach turn. "You've done this before, and I'll do it again if I need to. Old people are so easy to manipulate, so easy to isolate. And when they start complaining, who believes them? Everyone thinks they're just confused, paranoid, losing their grip." She stepped even closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here, be quiet, and cooperate. If you make trouble, accidents happen to elderly people. They fall downstairs. They forget to turn off the stove. They take the wrong medications. Do you understand what I'm saying?" I understood perfectly. She was threatening to kill me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Carol, probably wondering where I was. I turned and ran for the door, my hip still aching from yesterday's fall. I heard Stephanie shout something behind me, but I didn't stop. I yanked open the front door and hurried down the driveway as fast as I could manage. Carol's car was idling at the corner. I practically threw myself into the passenger seat. "Drive. Please, just drive." She took one look at my face and hit the gas. We were 3 blocks away before either of us spoke. "What happened?" Carol asked. I told her everything. The forged documents, the stolen money, Stephanie's threats. By the time I finished, we were pulling up to Carol's apartment building across town, and my sister's face was pale with fury. "We're going to the police. Right now." We drove straight to the police station. Officer Patterson, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, listened to my story. She took notes. She looked at the photos on my phone. She seemed sympathetic, but then she turned to her computer and started typing, and her expression changed. "Mrs. Billy." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need to show you something." She turned her screen toward me. There were legal documents filed with the county court, guardianship papers. filed 3 weeks ago, by Brandon. The documents claimed I had advancing dementia and severe memory loss. They included a doctor's evaluation from someone named Dr. Raymond Walsh. The evaluation described me as confused, unable to manage my own affairs, a danger to myself. It recommended immediate guardianship. Brandon had been granted temporary guardianship while a full hearing was scheduled. "I never saw this doctor," I said, my voice shaking. "I've never even heard that name before. This is all fake." "I believe you," Officer Patterson said gently. "But this complicates things. Legally, Brandon currently has authority over your finances and medical decisions. The transfers from your accounts, while suspicious, were technically authorized by your legal guardian. But the guardianship is based on a lie," Carol interjected. "I understand. And I'm going to open an investigation into Dr. Walsh and these documents. But it's going to take time. The courts move slowly, especially during the holidays." She looked at me sympathetically. "My advice is to get a lawyer, a good elder law attorney. You need to fight this guardianship and get it overturned." My phone started buzzing. I looked at the screen. "Brandon." I declined the call. It rang again. "Stephanie." I declined. It rang again. "Unknown number." Again and again. By the time we left the police station, an hour later, I had 64 missed calls. The voicemails were all variations on the same theme. Brandon insisting I was confused and needed to come home. Stephanie, her voice sweet again for the recording, saying they were worried about me. Unknown numbers claiming to be from doctors' offices or care facilities, saying I'd missed appointments I'd never made. They were building a narrative, making me look unstable, creating a paper trail of confusion and incompetence. Carol and I spent the rest of the day trying to reach lawyers. But it was the day after Christmas. Every office was closed. We left messages with 5 different elder law attorneys, begging them to call us back as soon as possible. That afternoon, I tried to access my bank account online. Locked. I tried my credit cards. All canceled. Brandon had used the guardianship papers to freeze me out of everything. I had no money, no access to my own funds, nothing. I sat in Carol's small living room, feeling the walls close in. Officer Patterson had told me the investigation would take weeks, maybe months. The guardianship hearing was scheduled for January 3rd. That gave me just over a week to find a lawyer, build a case, and somehow prove that I wasn't the confused old woman Brandon and Stephanie were painting me to be. Carol made us dinner, but I could barely eat. My phone kept ringing. The voicemails kept coming. And I kept thinking about Stephanie's words. "You're not the first." How many other people had she done this to? How many other families had she destroyed? And why did no one stop her? That night, I lay on Carol's couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the city sounds outside. I thought about Brandon, my son, the baby I'd held in my arms. The little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. The teenager who'd cried at his father's funeral and told me he'd take care of me forever. Where had that boy gone? How had he turned into someone who could push his own mother to the floor? Who could steal her life savings? Who could try to have her declared incompetent? Stephanie had said she was good at manipulating people. Maybe Brandon was a victim too, in his own way. Or maybe he was just weak. Maybe he'd always been weak, and I'd been too blind to see it. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, exhausted and scared. I dreamed of falling, over and over again, while everyone I loved stood around and watched. On December 27th, I finally got a call back from a lawyer. His name was Harold Brennan, and he agreed to see me that very afternoon. Carol drove me to his office downtown, a small suite in an older building, with worn carpet but neat furnishings. Harold was in his 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened to my entire story without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. "This is textbook elder abuse," he said when I finished. "Financial exploitation, guardianship fraud, forgery. Everything they've done is illegal." For the first time in 2 days, I felt a spark of hope. "Can you help me?" "Absolutely. We need to move fast." He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "I'm going to file emergency motions today to freeze all your accounts and prevent any further transfers. I'll also file to overturn the guardianship on the grounds that it was obtained through fraud. And we need to get a temporary restraining order against Brandon and Stephanie." "How long will all this take?" "The court will schedule a hearing as soon as possible, probably within a week or 2. In the meantime, stay away from them. Don't answer their calls. Don't go near the house. Let me handle everything through legal channels." I signed paperwork authorizing Harold to represent me. He explained that the guardianship hearing was already scheduled for January 3rd, which actually worked in our favor. We could present our evidence then. He seemed confident, capable. Like maybe, just maybe, this nightmare could end. Carol and I left his office feeling lighter than we had in days. We stopped for coffee at a little cafe, made plans for New Year's Eve at her apartment, talked about what I'd do when I got my house back, my money back, my life back. We got back to Carol's apartment around 9 that evening. I was starting to think about getting ready for bed when there was a loud, aggressive pounding on the door. Carol looked through the peephole, and her face went white. "It's Brandon, and Stephanie, and police officers." My heart stopped. "What?" The pounding came again. Brandon's voice, loud and desperate. "Mom! Mom, we know you're in there! Please, you're not well! You need help!" Carol opened the door, keeping the chain on. "Brandon, she doesn't want to see you. Leave her alone." One of the police officers, a tall man with a stern expression, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have a medical hold order. We need to speak with Billy." "A medical hold? What are you talking about?" Carol demanded. Stephanie pushed forward, her face tear-streaked and panicked. It was a masterful performance. "She's having a mental health crisis. She threatened to hurt herself earlier today. We have documentation from her psychiatrist, Dr. Walsh. We're afraid she's a danger to herself." "That's a lie!" I shouted from behind Carol. "I never threatened anything." "Please, ma'am," the other officer, a younger woman, said more gently. "We have a signed order for a 72-hour involuntary psychiatric commitment. We need to transport you to Riverside Psychiatric Facility for evaluation." "No," I said, my voice rising in panic. "No, this is part of their plan. They're lying. I have a lawyer, Harold Brennan. Call him, please." But the officers were already asking Carol to open the door. They had a legal order, signed by Dr. Walsh. They had to follow it. Carol tried to argue, showed them her phone with Harold's contact information, told them this was a setup. But the law was the law. They forced their way in, not roughly but firmly. I backed away, terrified. This couldn't be happening. I'd just started to fight back, just started to feel like I might win, and now they were going to lock me away. Stephanie continued her act, crying and reaching for me. "Mom, please don't fight. We just want to help you. You're so confused. You've been saying such paranoid things." Brandon stood behind her, and for just a moment I caught his eye. He looked guilty, scared, but he didn't stop any of it. "Please," I begged the officers, "please, just call my lawyer. Give me one phone call. This is all fake. The doctor who signed that order is Stephanie's cousin. It's fraud." The female officer hesitated. "Is that true?" she asked Brandon. "My mother is having paranoid delusions," Brandon said, his voice flat. "That's part of her condition. She thinks everyone is conspiring against her. Please, just help her." The officers looked at each other. They'd heard this kind of thing before, I realized. Mentally ill people claiming persecution. Families trying to get help for someone in crisis. They couldn't tell the difference between a real conspiracy and a delusion. "I'm sorry," the male officer said to me. "We have to follow the order. You'll be evaluated at the facility, and if there's been a mistake, it'll be cleared up. But right now, we need you to come with us." "No," I said, but my voice was weak. "Please, no." Carol grabbed my hand. "Billy, I'll call Harold right now. He'll get you out, I promise." As they escorted me to the patrol car, Brandon leaned close and whispered in my ear, quiet enough that only I could hear. "You should have just kept quiet and been grateful." The drive to Riverside Psychiatric Facility felt like being driven to prison. I sat in the back of the patrol car, my hands shaking, my mind racing. This was really happening. They were really going to lock me up. And once I was inside, who would believe me? A 70-year-old woman claiming her family was stealing from her? They'd think I was paranoid, delusional. Stephanie had won. At the facility, I was processed like a criminal. They took my phone, my purse, my shoes, gave me hospital scrubs and paper slippers, led me to a small room with a bed bolted to the floor and a window with bars on it, the door locked from the outside. I tried to explain to everyone I saw, the intake nurse, the night attendant, the psychiatrist who came to evaluate me at midnight, but they'd already been given Brandon and Stephanie's version of events. Elderly woman with dementia, refusing medication, making paranoid accusations about her loving son, who's just trying to help. They'd heard it all before. The psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Montgomery, was in her 40s and seemed more interested in her clipboard than in me. She asked me a series of questions, barely listening to my answers. Then she prescribed medication. "Something to help me sleep," she said. "Something to calm my anxiety." "I don't need medication," I protested. "I need you to listen to me. This is all a setup. Please, just call my lawyer, Harold Brennan. Please." "We'll contact your attorney in the morning," she said in a tone that suggested she had no intention of doing so. "For now, you need to rest." I refused to take the pills. They couldn't force me, but Dr. Montgomery made a note in her chart and told me that if I continued to be non-compliant, my hold could be extended. That first night in Riverside Psychiatric Facility was the longest of my life. I shared a common room with 6 other women, some truly struggling with severe mental illness. One woman talked to people who weren't there. Another rocked back and forth, humming the same tune over and over. I sat in a plastic chair and stared at the wall, trying not to cry. The hearing with Harold was 6 days away. 6 days. Could they keep me here that long? Could they convince a judge I really was incompetent? I'd thought going to the police would help. I'd thought getting a lawyer would save me. Instead, I was locked in a psychiatric facility, cut off from everyone, with no way to defend myself. Brandon and Stephanie hadn't just stolen my money, they'd stolen my freedom, my credibility, my basic human right to be believed, and I had no idea how I was going to get out. I woke up on December 28th, feeling foggy and disoriented, even though I hadn't taken their medication. Sleep deprivation and stress were taking their toll. A different nurse came in that morning, a younger woman named Grace, who seemed kinder than the night staff. She took my blood pressure and temperature, noted them on her chart. When she asked how I was feeling, I almost told her the truth, but caught myself. If I complained, if I seemed agitated, they'd mark me as unstable. I had to play their game. "I'm fine," I said calmly. "Just tired." "You didn't sleep much last night," Grace observed. "The night nurse said you refused medication." "I don't like taking pills unless I really need them." She nodded, not pushing it. There was something different about her. The other staff had looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. Grace looked at me like I was a person. Later that morning, I was required to attend group therapy. 10 of us sat in a circle while a therapist asked us to share our feelings. Some patients talked about their struggles with depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, real problems that deserved real help. When it was my turn, I simply said I was working through some family issues and left it at that. Dr. Montgomery appeared after lunch to check on me. She asked if I was ready to take the prescribed medication. I knew I had to be smart about this. If I kept refusing, kept insisting nothing was wrong with me, they'd see it as denial, part of my supposed illness. "I'd like to understand what you're prescribing, and why," I said carefully. "I'm not refusing treatment. I just want to be informed about my care." She seemed slightly appeased by this. "It's a mild anti-anxiety medication and a sleep aid. Given your age and the stress you're under, I think it will help." "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Maybe start tonight instead of right now?" She made a note. "That's acceptable, but I will need to see compliance soon, or I'll have to recommend extending your hold." After she left, I felt the trap tightening. If I took the medication, I'd be foggy, less able to think clearly and defend myself. If I didn't take it, they'd use it as evidence of non-compliance. I couldn't win. That afternoon, during free time in the common room, Grace came by again. She was checking on another patient, but she lingered near me. "You doing okay?" she asked quietly. I took a chance. "Can I ask you something? Off the record?" She glanced around, then nodded. "What if someone was brought here who wasn't really mentally ill? What if their family lied to get them committed? What would happen?" Grace's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. That would be fraud. It's illegal, but it would be hard to prove. "What if I told you that's what happened to me?" She sat down in the chair next to me, pretending to review a chart. "A lot of patients say that." "I know. But what if it was true? What if my son and his wife forged documents and are trying to steal everything I have? What if the doctor who signed my commitment order is my daughter-in-law's cousin and she's done this before to other people?" I said it all in a low, calm voice. No hysteria, no tears, just facts. Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What's your daughter-in-law's name?" "Stephanie Thornton." "Well, that's her married name. I don't know her maiden name." Grace went very still. "Thornton?" "Yes. Do you know her?" Grace looked around again, making sure no one was listening. 3 years ago, my aunt worked at a nursing home in the next county over. There was a woman there, very wealthy, who'd been placed in memory care by her granddaughter. The granddaughter's name was Stephanie. My aunt always thought something was off about the situation. The old woman seemed perfectly lucid, kept insisting she'd been tricked, that her granddaughter was stealing from her. But no one believed her. She died 6 months later. My blood ran cold. Did your aunt remember the granddaughter's last name? I'd have to ask her. But I remember there was a photo in the newspaper when the grandmother died, the granddaughter crying at the funeral. I remember thinking she looked too young to be that heartbroken, if that makes sense. Like she was performing. Can you find the article? Please? Grace hesitated. This could cost her her job. But something in my story, or maybe in my eyes, convinced her. Give me an hour. She left, and I waited, my heart pounding. If Stephanie had done this before, if there was proof, maybe someone would finally believe me. An hour later, during the afternoon medication round, Grace slipped me a piece of paper. On it was written, a website address and a date. I couldn't access the internet here, but I memorized it. That evening, Grace came back during her break. She pulled me into a quiet corner near the vending machines. "I found it," she whispered. "The article from 3 years ago. The woman's name was Dorothy Brennan. She died at 68. The granddaughter was Stephanie Thornton, though her last name was different then. She wasn't married yet. What happened to Dorothy? According to the obituary, complications from dementia. But the article mentioned she'd been perfectly healthy until suddenly being placed in memory care, and she left everything to Stephanie. Nothing to Dorothy's own son, Stephanie's uncle. My aunt always suspected something wrong, but there was no proof. Did you save the article?" Grace pulled out her phone. She'd taken screenshots. A photo of Stephanie at a funeral, looking appropriately sad. An obituary mentioning the sizable estate Dorothy left behind. A quote from Stephanie about how much she'd loved her grandmother. It was the same playbook. Get an elderly person declared incompetent. Take control of their assets. Isolate them. And if they died, well, that solved the problem permanently. "I need to get this to my lawyer," I said urgently. "And I need to get out of here. If Stephanie did this to her own grandmother, if she's done it before, she'll do it to me." Grace nodded slowly. "I could lose my license for what I'm about to do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out my phone. "I had someone get this from the storage locker. You have until shift change at 11. Then I need it back. Make your calls. Do what you need to do. But if you get caught, I never gave this to you." I took the phone with shaking hands. "Thank you. Thank you so much." My aunt always regretted not doing more for Dorothy. I'm not making that mistake twice. I hurried back to my room and immediately called Harold. He answered on the second ring. "Billy, where are you calling from? They told me you couldn't have phone privileges." "It's a long story. Listen, I don't have much time." I told him everything. About Dorothy Brennan, about Stephanie's pattern, about Grace and the articles. Harold was silent for a moment, then I heard rapid typing. "Brennan? That name is familiar. Wait. Gerald Brennan. He contacted our office 2 years ago about his mother's estate. Said he suspected fraud, but couldn't afford to pursue it. Billy, if this is the same family, if Stephanie did this before, this changes everything. Can you use it?" "Absolutely. This establishes a pattern of behavior. It makes the current guardianship look even more fraudulent. I'm going to track down Gerald Brennan tonight, and I'm filing new emergency motions first thing tomorrow morning to get you released. The hearing is January 3rd. That's 5 days away. I know. I'm working on getting it moved up, but the holidays are slowing everything down. Can you hold on there until then?" I heard footsteps in the hallway. "I have to go. Harold, please hurry." "I will. And Billy, don't give up. We're going to win this." I ended the call just as a staff member walked past. I hid the phone under my pillow and lay down, pretending to rest. A few minutes later, Grace appeared, and I handed it back. "Thank you," I whispered. She just nodded and left. That night, I actually managed to sleep for a few hours. For the first time since Christmas, I felt like I had a weapon, information, proof, a pattern that even a skeptical judge would have to take seriously. But around 9 o'clock, the ward nurse came to my room with bad news. I had visitors, Brandon and Stephanie. They were waiting in the common room, surrounded by other patients and staff. Stephanie looked concerned and compassionate for the audience. Brandon looked uncomfortable. "Mom," Stephanie said, reaching for my hands. I pulled away. "We're so worried about you. The doctors say you're refusing treatment." "I don't need treatment. I need you to admit what you've done. See?" Stephanie turned to a nearby staff member. "She's still having these paranoid episodes. It's so heartbreaking." "We're here to help," Brandon said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Stephanie pulled out more papers from her purse. "We brought the final guardianship documents. If you sign these, we can make sure you get the best care." We found a lovely memory care facility with beautiful gardens and caring staff. A locked facility where they could keep me forever, where I'd eventually die, just like Dorothy Brennan. "I'm not signing anything," I said clearly. Stephanie's mask slipped for just a second. Her eyes went cold. Then the sweet expression returned. "Mom, please. This is for your own good." A staff member approached. "Visiting hours are over in 5 minutes." Stephanie leaned close, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "Sign the papers or accidents happen, even here, especially here. Medication errors, falls. Things happen to elderly patients all the time." She was threatening to kill me. Right here, in front of everyone, and no one could hear it but me. Brandon grabbed her arm. "Steph, let's go." As they left, Stephanie turned back with a smile. "We'll see you soon, Mom. Feel better." I watched them walk away, and for the first time I truly understood how much danger I was in. They weren't just going to steal from me. If I didn't cooperate, they were going to make sure I never left this place alive. I spent a restless night, jumping at every sound. Every time a staff member came to check on me, I wondered if Stephanie had gotten to them, if my medication had been tampered with, if I was safe at all. By the early morning of December 29th, I'd made a decision. I couldn't wait for the hearing. I had to get out of here now. Grace appeared during the 4 o'clock shift change. She found me in the common room, unable to sleep, staring out the window at the dark parking lot below. She sat down next to me, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "Your lawyer called the facility administrator. He's demanding your release. And the administrator is stalling. Said she needs to review all the documentation first. But I did some digging in your file. That Dr. Walsh, who signed your commitment papers, he's Stephanie's cousin. I found his credentials. He's licensed, but he works in dermatology. He has no psychiatric training whatsoever. So the whole thing is fraud. Complete fraud. But the administrator has connections to some of the same people who approved your guardianship. I think they're all covering for each other." I closed my eyes. The system that was supposed to protect me was rigged. What do I do? Grace was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about my aunt, about Dorothy Brennan, about how no one helped her, how she died alone in a facility just like this one, probably scared and convinced no one believed her. Grace, you've already helped me so much. You've risked enough. Not enough." She pulled something from her pocket, a visitor badge and my street clothes. "Shift change is at 6. There's a 15-minute gap when the security cameras reset. The loading dock door in the basement is usually propped open by the maintenance staff. If someone were to walk out during that gap, wearing a visitor badge, they probably wouldn't be stopped." My heart started racing. "You're talking about helping me escape. I'm talking about the right thing. If you stay here and something happens to you, I'll never forgive myself. Your lawyer knows the truth. You have evidence. But you need to be free to fight this. You'll lose your job, maybe your license, maybe. But I can live with that. I can't live with another Dorothy Brennan." She stood up. 605, basement loading dock. I'll be covering the second floor medication round. I won't see anything. I won't know anything." She walked away before I could thank her. At 6:03 in the morning, I slipped into the bathroom and changed into my street clothes. My hands shook as I pinned on the visitor badge. At 6:05 exactly, I walked calmly through the common room, down the back stairs, and into the basement. The loading dock door was propped open, just like Grace said. The cold December air hit my face. I walked out into the pre-dawn darkness, half expecting alarms to sound or someone to grab me. But nothing happened. I made it to the street and kept walking, my hip aching but adrenaline keeping me moving. I found a gas station 2 blocks away and called Carol from their payphone. She picked me up 20 minutes later, crying and hugging me. Oh my God, I thought they'd never let you go." They didn't. I escaped. I explained everything as she drove back to her apartment. Harold was already there, waiting. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept. When he saw me, his expression was a mix of relief and concern. "I was going to get you out legally," he said, "but I'm glad you're safe. What's going to happen now?" His face fell. The guardianship hearing got moved up. It's tomorrow, December 31st. My stomach dropped. Tomorrow? How? Brandon and Stephanie filed emergency motions. They're using your escape from the facility as evidence that you're unstable and need immediate intervention. They convinced Judge Martin Sawyer to expedite the hearing. Can we win? Harold hesitated. Judge Sawyer is known for quick rulings in guardianship cases, and he tends to side with family members who appear to have the elderly person's best interests at heart. We have evidence of fraud, but it's complicated. The forged signatures, Dr. Walsh's credentials, Stephanie's history. It's all circumstantial. What about Dorothy Brennan? I tracked down her son, Gerald. He's willing to testify about what Stephanie did to his mother, but Judge Sawyer might not allow it. He could say it's irrelevant to your case. Harold sat down heavily. Billy, I'm going to fight as hard as I can, but you need to prepare yourself. They have a psychiatric hold order. They have guardianship papers already in place. They have a doctor's evaluation, fraudulent as it is. And now they can point to you escaping a mental health facility as proof you're not competent to make your own decisions. I felt the world tilting again, just like when Brandon pushed me. After everything I'd been through, all the fighting, all the evidence we'd gathered, I was still going to lose. There's something else, Harold said quietly. I got a call from Officer Patterson. She completed her preliminary investigation. She found evidence of the forged signatures and the fake doctor's evaluation. She's recommending fraud charges against Stephanie and Dr. Walsh. That's good, right? It's good for a criminal case, but the judge tomorrow is only deciding guardianship. Even if we eventually win the criminal case, if you lose tomorrow, you could be locked in a memory care facility for months or years while it plays out. And given Stephanie's history, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Carol made coffee, but I couldn't drink it. My hands were shaking too much. I looked at the calendar on her refrigerator. December 29th. Tomorrow was the 30th. The hearing was on New Year's Eve. I thought about Brandon, about that phone call when he'd been drunk and crying, saying he never wanted it to go this far, that Stephanie had something on him. What if Brandon testified against her? I asked suddenly. Harold looked up. That would change everything, but he's not going to. He's legally and financially tied to her. If she goes down, he goes down with her. What if he thought he could get immunity? What if he thought there was a way out that didn't destroy him? The prosecutor might offer a deal if he cooperated fully. But Billy, he pushed you down. He forged your signature. He filed false guardianship papers. There would still be consequences. Less than if he sticks with Stephanie? Probably. But getting him to flip is a long shot. I thought about my son, the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become. Weak, yes. Easily manipulated, yes. But underneath all of Stephanie's control, was there any part of him that still loved me, that still had a conscience? I didn't know. And I was running out of time to find out. That evening, I tried calling Brandon. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. "Brandon, it's your mom. I know you're scared. I know Stephanie has control over you. But there's still time to do the right thing. Please, call me back." He didn't. I tried again at 10 o'clock, midnight, 2 in the morning. Nothing. I finally fell asleep on Carol's couch around 4, knowing that when I woke up, it would be the day that determined everything. Win, and I got my life back. Lose, and I'd spend whatever time I had left locked away, probably dying in some facility like Dorothy Brennan, while Stephanie walked away with everything. I dreamed of Brandon as a little boy, holding my hand, telling me he'd always protect me. But in the dream, his hand turned cold, and when I looked down, he was gone. December 31st arrived gray and cold. Carol helped me dress in my most professional outfit, a navy suit I'd worn to court once before, years ago, when my husband's will was being settled. It felt like armor now. We arrived at the county courthouse at 9 in the morning. The hearing was scheduled for 10. Harold met us in the lobby, carrying 2 briefcases full of documents. Brandon and Stephanie were already there, sitting on a bench near the courtroom doors. Stephanie wore a tasteful black dress and pearls, looking every inch the concerned daughter-in-law. Brandon wore a suit I'd bought him for his college graduation. When he saw me, something flickered across his face, but Stephanie grabbed his hand, and he looked away. Their attorney, Douglas Whitmore, was a man in his 50s, with expensive shoes and the kind of confidence that came from winning cases. He nodded politely at Harold, but didn't speak to me. At 10 o'clock exactly, we were called into the courtroom. Judge Martin Sawyer sat behind the bench, a stern-looking man with gray hair and an impatient expression. He glanced at the clock as if annoyed the hearing was cutting into his New Year's Eve plans. "Let's make this efficient," he said. "I've reviewed the preliminary motions. Mr. Whitmore, you're representing the petitioner, Brandon Thornton?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Brennan, you're representing Billy Thornton, the respondent?" "Correct, Your Honor." "Proceed." Douglas stood, his presentation polished and practiced. "Your Honor, this is a tragic case of an elderly woman suffering from advancing dementia who refuses to accept her condition. My client, Brandon Thornton, is the devoted son who has been trying to protect his mother as her mental faculties decline. He presented the guardianship papers, Dr. Walsh's evaluation, bank statements showing what he characterized as erratic purchases, but which I knew were forged transactions. He painted a picture of a confused old woman who couldn't manage her own affairs. Furthermore, Your Honor, just 2 days ago, Mrs. Thornton escaped from a psychiatric facility where she'd been placed on a medical hold for her own safety. This demonstrates both her inability to recognize her own condition and the danger she poses to herself. Stephanie took the stand. She'd perfected her performance. Tears welled in her eyes as she talked about how much she loved me, how hard it had been to watch me decline. She described incidents that never happened. Me forgetting to turn off the stove. Me getting lost on the way to the grocery store. Me becoming aggressive and paranoid. "We just want to keep her safe," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We want her to get the care she needs. Brandon testified next. He looked miserable, his voice flat. He confirmed Stephanie's stories, said he'd noticed my decline over the past year, that the Christmas dinner incident happened because I'd become confused and combative. When Douglas asked about the house, Brandon said I'd voluntarily sold it to them in June, though I'd since forgotten about it. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. They were just trying to help, Harold cross-examined, pointing out inconsistencies. The handwriting on signatures that didn't quite match. The timing of the guardianship filing, just days before I discovered the missing money. He tried to introduce evidence about Dorothy Brennan. Objection, Douglas said immediately. Unrelated prior allegations have no bearing on this case. Your Honor, Harold argued, this establishes a pattern of behavior. The same woman who allegedly cared for her grandmother, who died under suspicious circumstances with her estate going entirely to my opponent's wife, is now seeking guardianship of my client. Sustained, Judge Sawyer said, cutting Harold off. Mr. Brennan, unless you have direct evidence linking the two cases, it's hearsay and speculation. Move on. Harold tried to present Gerald Brennan's testimony via phone, but the judge refused to allow it. Every point Harold made, Douglas countered with legal procedure. Every piece of evidence we tried to introduce got blocked or minimized. I took the stand to testify on my own behalf. I explained everything as clearly as I could. The forged signatures, the stolen money, Stephanie's threats, Dr. Walsh being her cousin. But Douglas cross-examined me aggressively. Mrs. Thornton, what date did you move into your current residence? I'm staying with my sister right now, but my house, I moved there in 1990. And what's your sister's address? I froze. I knew Carol's address. I'd been there dozens of times. But my mind went blank. The stress, the lack of sleep, the trauma of the past week, it all caught up with me. It's on Maple Street. Number. I couldn't remember the number. You don't remember your sister's address? The place where you claim you've been staying? I know it. I'm stressed. Of course. Let me ask you something else. What day of the week was Christmas this year? Wednesday. I said it with confidence. Actually, it was Friday. Do you remember what you had for breakfast this morning? Coffee. And toast, I think. You think? Or you know? Every question was designed to make me look confused, and the more flustered I got, the worse it became. I mixed up a few dates. Couldn't recall a phone number without looking at my phone. Small details that anyone under stress might forget, but in this context, they made me look exactly like the incompetent old woman they were painting me to be. You see, Your Honor, Douglas said, turning to the judge, Mrs. Thornton is clearly experiencing cognitive decline. Her own testimony demonstrates confusion and memory loss. This is precisely why she needs the protection of a guardian. Judge Sawyer looked convinced. He started shuffling papers, preparing to rule. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mrs. Thornton is unable to manage her own affairs and requires a guardian. I'm prepared to grant permanent guardianship to Brandon Thornton, effective immediately. He reached for his pen to sign the order. Carol grabbed my hand. Harold started to object, but the judge was already speaking. And then the courtroom doors burst open. Grace ran in, slightly out of breath, carrying a laptop. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I have urgent evidence that pertains to this case. Judge Sawyer looked annoyed. Young lady, this is highly irregular. I know, Your Honor, and I apologize. But this is crucial. Please, just 5 minutes. Harold stood immediately. Your Honor, this is Grace Foster, a registered nurse at Riverside Psychiatric Facility. I believe her testimony is directly relevant. Judge Sawyer sighed. Fine. 5 minutes, but make it quick." Grace hurried to the front of the courtroom. Her hands shook as she set up her laptop. "Your Honor, I work at the facility where Mrs. Thornton was held. I have security footage that I believe you need to see." She played the video. It showed the common room at Riverside, Stephanie and Brandon visiting me. At first, it looked innocent, but then Grace fast-forwarded to a moment when the staff member had walked away. In the video, you could see Stephanie leaning close to me, her expression cold and threatening, completely different from the concerned act she'd been putting on. Though the audio was garbled, her body language was clearly menacing. "This was taken 2 days ago," Grace said. "Mrs. Thornton had just refused to sign guardianship papers. What you're seeing is Mrs. Thornton's daughter-in-law threatening her." "Objection!" Douglas stood. "This video is taken completely out of context. My client was simply trying to reason with her confused mother-in-law." "There's more," Grace said. She pulled up different footage. "This is from the facility parking lot, taken 3 days before Mrs. Thornton was committed." The video showed Stephanie meeting with a man in a white coat. They were laughing, counting money, clearly in on something together. "That's Dr. Raymond Walsh, the doctor who signed Mrs. Thornton's commitment order. He's also Mrs. Thornton's daughter-in-law's cousin. They're not related to Mrs. Thornton at all, yet he signed papers saying she was a danger to herself based on an evaluation that never happened." Grace pulled up more documents. "These are Mrs. Thornton's actual medical records from intake at Riverside. The real psychiatric evaluation, done by Dr. Ellen Montgomery, states that Mrs. Thornton appeared lucid and coherent, but claimed she was being held against her will. Dr. Montgomery recommended further evaluation, but those notes were never submitted to this court. Instead, Dr. Walsh's fabricated evaluation was submitted." Judge Sawyer's expression had changed completely. He motioned for Grace to bring the laptop closer and studied the footage himself. "Mr. Whitmore, can you explain this?" Douglas looked flustered. "Your Honor, I have no knowledge of any impropriety. My clients provided me with what they represented as legitimate medical documentation." "Call Dr. Walsh," the judge ordered his clerk. The clerk tried. No answer. Multiple calls went to voicemail. Judge Sawyer looked at Stephanie and Brandon. "Is Dr. Walsh related to you?" Stephanie's mask was cracking. "He's my cousin, but that doesn't mean anything. He's a licensed doctor." "Licensed in dermatology," Grace interjected. "He has no psychiatric credentials whatsoever." The judge ordered a recess. We sat in the hallway for 30 tense minutes while he reviewed everything in his chambers. Douglas and Stephanie were arguing in harsh whispers. Brandon sat alone, his head in his hands. When court reconvened, Brandon stood up suddenly. "Your Honor, I need to say something." Douglas grabbed his arm. "Brandon, don't." Stephanie's whisper was vicious. "If you say one word, I swear I'll destroy you." But Brandon pulled away from both of them. He walked to the front of the court. "Your Honor, I need to tell the truth." Judge Sawyer looked surprised, but gestured for him to proceed. Brandon's voice shook. "Everything Stephanie said was a lie. My mother doesn't have dementia. She's completely competent. We forged the documents. I forged her signature on the bank transfers. Stephanie planned the whole thing. She threatened to expose an affair I had and take everything in a divorce if I didn't go along with it." The courtroom erupted. Stephanie stood up, screaming, "You spineless piece of garbage! We had everything. You're throwing it all away." "She did the same thing to her grandmother 3 years ago," Brandon continued, talking over Stephanie's shouting. "Dorothy Brennan? Stephanie got her declared incompetent, stole her money, and the old woman died 6 months later. She told me it was an accident, but I think Stephanie killed her." and she was planning to do the same thing to my mother. Court officers had to physically restrain Stephanie as she lunged toward Brandon. She was screaming threats, all pretense of the sweet daughter-in-law gone. Her true face was finally visible to everyone. Judge Sawyer slammed his gavel repeatedly. "Order! Everyone sit down now." It took several minutes for the chaos to settle. When it finally did, Judge Sawyer's face was severe. "I am revoking the guardianship immediately. All financial control is restored to Mrs. Billy Thornton. Effective now. I'm also ordering an immediate investigation into fraud charges against Stephanie Thornton and Dr. Raymond Walsh. Mr. Brandon Thornton, you'll be facing charges as well, though I note your cooperation here today." He looked at me. "Mrs. Thornton, I apologize. It appears a grave injustice was about to be done here. Your accounts will be unfrozen immediately, and any improperly transferred funds must be returned within 30 days. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears streaming down my face. Carol was crying beside me. Harold squeezed my shoulder. As we left the courtroom, Stephanie was being taken away by police, still screaming threats. Brandon stood alone in the hallway, his career and life in ruins, but he'd finally done the right thing. He looked at me, his eyes red. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say to him, so I said nothing. I just walked past him, leaning on Carol, and left the courthouse. I'd won, but I felt hollow, exhausted, and unsure of what came next. 3 months passed before I truly felt like myself again. It was early April when I woke up, in my own bedroom, in my own house, and realized for the first time in months that I felt safe. The house was truly mine again. All the legal documents had been corrected. The deed was back in my name. Most of my money had been recovered, though about $50,000 was gone forever, spent by Stephanie on God knows what. Stephanie was in county jail awaiting trial. The investigation had uncovered that I wasn't her only victim. 5 other elderly people came forward with similar stories. She'd been running this con across 3 states for years, leaving a trail of broken families and drained bank accounts. The prosecutor was confident she'd be convicted on multiple counts of elder fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. She was looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. Dr. Walsh had lost his medical license and was facing his own criminal charges. He'd been paid by Stephanie to sign false medical evaluations for at least 4 different people. His career was over, and he'd likely serve prison time too. Brandon had accepted a plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Stephanie and cooperating fully with investigators, he received probation, community service, and mandatory restitution. He had to pay back what he could of the money he'd helped steal. His marriage to Stephanie was over. She'd filed for divorce from jail, screaming at him during the court proceedings that he'd betrayed her, that he'd ruined everything. I hadn't spoken to him since the hearing. He'd sent letters, long ones, explaining how Stephanie had manipulated him from the start, how she'd targeted him specifically because she'd researched his family and knew I had assets, how she'd slowly isolated him from me, making him resent me, using sex and money and psychological tactics to control him, how she'd threatened to expose his affair and destroy his reputation if he didn't cooperate, how weak he'd been, how sorry he was. I read every letter. But I didn't respond. Grace had lost her nursing license temporarily for helping me escape, but Harold had filed appeals. More importantly, Grace and I had become friends. She visited every Tuesday for coffee. I'd hired her as a part-time companion and advocate for other elderly people in the community who needed someone to check in on them, help them manage their affairs, watch for signs of abuse or exploitation. She was good at it. and it gave her a sense of purpose while she waited for her license appeals to process. Harold Brennan had become a friend too. He'd fought so hard for me, and I'd referred 3 other elderly people to him who needed help with guardianship issues. He'd told me that taking my case had reminded him why he'd become a lawyer in the first place. One Saturday morning in mid-April, I woke to the sound of a lawnmower. I looked out my bedroom window and saw Brandon in my yard, pushing my old mower back and forth across the grass. He'd been doing this for 6 weeks now, every Saturday. He'd show up early, do the yard work, trim the hedges, pull weeds, and then leave without knocking on my door or asking for anything. This Saturday, I made a decision. I went outside. Brandon saw me and immediately turned off the mower. He looked terrified. "Come inside when you're finished," I said. "We need to talk." An hour later, we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he'd pushed me down on Christmas. The wood had been refinished, but I could still see a small stain where the gravy had spilled. We sat in silence for a long time. Brandon's hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee, but he hadn't drunk any. "I don't know how to start," he finally said. "Start with the truth. All of it." So he did. He told me how Stephanie had seemed perfect at first. Beautiful, charming, interested in everything he said. How she'd slowly started making comments about how I was getting older, how I'd need help soon, how it was his responsibility as my son to prepare for that, how she'd convinced him to move in with me, saying it would be good for all of us. He told me how the manipulation had escalated, how she'd seduced him, then withheld affection when he didn't do what she wanted, how she'd convinced him to access my accounts just to keep an eye on things, how she'd forged my signature the first time, then taught him how to do it, how the small thefts had grown larger. "She said it was already my inheritance anyway," Brandon said, his voice hollow. "She said we were just accessing it early, that you'd never even notice. But I did notice, and you kept going." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I was so deep in it by then, and she'd found out about my affair. Threatened to tell everyone, threatened to divorce me and take everything. I was trapped. "You weren't trapped," I said quietly. "You made choices. Every single day you chose her over me." "I know." He was openly sobbing now. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. When I pushed you down on Christmas, when I saw you lying there on the floor, I hated myself. But I was so scared of her, so scared of what she'd do. You should have been more scared of what you were doing to your own mother." "I know. God, Mom, I know." I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight. His hair was graying at the temples. He looked 10 years older than he had at Christmas. The consequences of his choices had aged him. "Your father," I said, "made mistakes too. When we were first married, he had a gambling problem, lost thousands of dollars that we didn't have, lied to me about it. When I found out, I was ready to leave him." Brandon looked up, surprised. I'd never told him this story, but he came clean, completely. He got help. He went to Gamblers Anonymous. He worked 3 jobs to pay back what he'd lost. It took him 2 years, but he did it, and he never gambled again. Not once. I paused. "I see some of your father in you. The weakness, yes, but also the capacity to change. Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "What you did was unforgivable. You stole from me. You tried to have me declared incompetent. You let her put me in a psychiatric facility. You pushed me down in front of everyone and humiliated me. I know. But," I continued, "you also stopped it. When it mattered most, you chose the truth. You risked everything to tell the judge what really happened. And you've been showing up every Saturday. Not asking for anything, just trying to make amends. I'll keep showing up, for as long as you'll let me. We sat in silence again. Then I said, Sunday breakfast, 8 o'clock. You can come if you want. No promises beyond that. No guarantees. But we'll start there. Brandon's face crumpled. Thank you. Mom, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We have a long road ahead, and I need you to be in therapy. Real therapy, with someone who specializes in manipulation and abuse. Because you were abused, Brandon. What Stephanie did to you was abuse. But that doesn't excuse what you did to me. I'm already in therapy. Twice a week. Good. Keep going. Over the next few months, we rebuilt slowly. Sunday breakfasts became a routine. Sometimes we talked about what happened. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes the silences were comfortable. Sometimes they were painful. Brandon was doing his community service at a senior center, helping elderly people learn to recognize and avoid scams. He'd volunteered for extra hours beyond what his probation required. He'd found a purpose in helping people avoid what his mother had gone through. In June, 6 months after that terrible Christmas, I hosted a small gathering at my house. Carol was there with Derek. Grace came with her aunt, the nurse who'd first recognized Stephanie. Harold brought his wife, and Gerald Brennan, Dorothy's son, drove 3 hours to attend. He'd become an unexpected friend, someone who understood what I'd been through because he'd seen it happen to his own mother. We were celebrating multiple things. Stephanie's trial was over. 18 years in prison. Dr. Walsh got 12 years. The other victims were getting justice too. We were also celebrating my 70th birthday, 6 months late. Brandon showed up with a gift. A photo album he'd made himself. Pictures of us through the years. Him as a baby, his first day of school, high school graduation, his wedding to his first wife, before Stephanie. All the good memories. On each page, he'd written a note. Apologies, memories, gratitude for the sacrifices I'd made raising him alone. The last page had a recent photo, Brandon doing community service at the senior center, helping an elderly woman understand a confusing Medicare form. Under it, he'd written, "Learning to be the son you deserved. It might take the rest of my life, but I won't stop trying." As everyone ate cake and talked, I stood in my living room and looked around. My sister, who'd never doubted me. Grace, who'd risked everything to help a stranger. Harold, who'd fought when I couldn't fight for myself. Gerald, who'd found justice for his mother through my case. And Brandon, trying to climb back from the worst thing he'd ever done. My life wasn't perfect. I'd been betrayed by the person I trusted most. I'd lost money I'd worked 40 years to save. I'd been humiliated, institutionalized, nearly had my entire identity erased. But I'd survived. I'd fought back. And I'd won. I thought about all the elderly people out there who weren't as lucky, who didn't have a sister like Carol or a nurse like Grace, who didn't escape the traps set by people who saw them as nothing more than bank accounts to drain. The Dorothy Brennans of the world, who died alone and afraid, convinced no one would believe them. That night, as everyone left and I was cleaning up, Brandon asked if he could help. We washed dishes side by side, the way we used to when he was young. "Mom," he said quietly, "what you went through, what I put you through, it changed me. I'm not asking you to forgive me completely. I know that might never happen. But I want you to know that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your son again." I dried a plate, considering my words carefully. The greatest thing about being human is that we can change. We can make terrible choices and still choose to do better. But changing isn't something you do once. It's something you do every single day, with every single choice. I know. I'm proud that you're helping other seniors avoid what happened to me. That's good work. It's the least I can do." We finished the dishes in companionable silence. When he left that night, I hugged him. Not a long hug, not the way I used to when he was young, but a hug nonetheless. A beginning. I stood on my porch and watched his car pull away. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and walked through my house. My house. Not Stephanie's, not Brandon's, mine. I'd learned so much through this nightmare. I'd learned that even when everyone tries to tell you you're crazy, you have to trust yourself. I'd learned that asking for help isn't weakness. I'd learned that the people meant to protect you can hurt you the most, but that doesn't mean you stop trusting entirely. You just trust more carefully. You just love with your eyes open. I'd learned that being pushed down doesn't mean you have to stay down. You can stand up. You can fight back. You can reclaim everything they tried to take from you. And most importantly, I'd learned that your truth is your power. When Stephanie tried to convince everyone I was incompetent, when Brandon tried to steal my story and replace it with theirs, the one thing they couldn't take was my truth. As long as I held on to that, as long as I refused to accept their version of reality, I had power. I went to bed that night in my own room, in my own house, surrounded by my own things, safe, vindicated, at peace. The journey from that terrible Christmas dinner to this moment had been hell. There had been moments when I wanted to give up, when the weight of fighting seemed too heavy to bear. But I'd kept going, and I'd won not just the legal battle, but something more important. I'd won the battle for my dignity, for my right to exist as a full human being, not as someone's victim or someone's payout. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about something Harold had said months ago. They tried to erase you, but you refused to be erased. That was it exactly. They'd tried to make me disappear, but I'd stood up and said, no, I exist, I matter. My life has value, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. To anyone out there who's being told they're crazy, who's being gaslit or manipulated or abused by someone they love, please hear this. Your truth matters. Your voice matters. You matter. Don't let anyone steal your story or your dignity. Stand up, fight back, find people who believe you, and never, ever give up, because you're stronger than anyone who tries to break you. And when you finally win, when you reclaim your life, the peace you'll feel will be worth every moment of the fight. Have you ever had to stand up against someone you loved who was hurting you? How did you find the strength to keep fighting when everyone doubted you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that matter. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who might be going through their own battle right now. Together, we can make sure fewer people suffer alone the way I almost did. Thank you for listening to my story. I wish you strength, courage, and the absolute certainty that you deserve to be believed and respected, no matter your age. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you're never too old to fight for your dignity.